insurance fraud, dealer lies, and a buried prototype. This wasn't just engineering, it was a Shakespearean tragedy of corporate betrayal, 425 horsepower, 11,000 RPM, and a corporate silence order buried in GM's secret vaults. This is the engine Detroit didn't want you to have. The Chevrolet 396, a street-legal racing engine that dominated drag strips, terrified insurance companies, and ignited a civil war inside General Motors. Why was it really banned? Too powerful, too successful, and too dangerous. Tonight we expose the truth and the blood feud that killed America's baddest big block. It was the meanest, most powerful big block in the Chevrolet arsenal, but just years into its production, it was pulled back into the shadows. It is the Chevy 396, an engine built for speed and domination, but vanished so soon. To this day, people still ask, why did Chevrolet quietly phase out one of its most powerful and legendary engines? Why Chevrolet turned its back on one of its fiercest creations? GM's 400 cubic inch ban was strangling Chevrolet. While Ford and Chrysler unleashed monsters, Chevy was trapped with the small block 327. Hidden away in a locked Detroit skunkworks, engineers Bill Polkinghorne, chief designer, and Dick Keenath, Chevrolet R&D lead. These engineering geniuses were plotting a revolution. Their new weapon? The L78, born at Chevrolet's Tonawanda Engine Plant, New York. The L78 wasn't just engineered, it was weaponized. Rectangular port heads flowed 30% more air than the Corvettes. Forged TRW pistons, slammed at 11-to-1 compression. A solid lifter cam, 0.519-inch lift, demanded constant tuning. Mechanics quickly nicknamed it Big Rat. Forums like Chevy Talk. Engineer complained, you couldn't idle it at a stoplight without fouling plugs. But oh God, when you pushed it above 4,000 RPM, it sang. Dick Harrell, drag racer, said, it felt like it'd punch you in the chest when the secondaries opened. Chevy lied about performance. Why? Insurance rates. A '69 L78 cost a 19-year-old $1,200 a year to insure, $10,000 today. But on track, it dominated. Bill Jenkins's 1966 Nova stunned NHRA Superstock fans, running 11.90 seconds at 115 miles per hour, beating Hemi with 50 fewer cubes. Chevy's small block 327 and the aging 409 were solid performers, but they couldn't keep up in this new age of big block brawlers. Something had to change, and fast. By 1964, the pressure became too much. GM executives finally lifted the cap, and with that green light, Chevrolet engineers went to work. What they created next wasn't just an engine, it was a statement. Enter the Mark IV big block engine family, a bold leap forward in Chevrolet's engine design. Developed by top engineers like Bill Polkinghorne and Dick Keenath, this next-generation V8 was built to dominate. In 1965, the 396 made its debut, tailored to pack serious muscle into Chevy's mid-size cars. There were a few versions, the L35 with 325 horsepower and the L34 with 360. Both were impressive. But Chevy wasn't just looking to compete. They wanted to crush the competition, especially Chrysler's fearsome Hemi. The 396 wasn't just a high-performance option, it was a street-legal racing engine. On paper, Chevrolet rated it at 425 horsepower at 6,400 RPM and 415 pounds of torque. But the real numbers? Rumors flew among racers and insiders alike. Dyno tests suggested it could push out as much as 500 horsepower in perfect tuned conditions. Why the lowball figure? Simple. Chevrolet wanted to avoid drawing too much attention from insurance companies and corporate executives who were nervous about putting race engines in street cars. So they played it cool with the official numbers while letting the car's performance do all the talking on the track. And talk it did. The 396 didn't just compete with the Hemi, it became a legend in its own right. The 396 engine was also the product of a secretive high-stakes mission inside Chevrolet. Developed in a off-the-books skunkworks project, the engine was born from a simple but ambitious goal: build a street-legal powerhouse that could dominate NHRA superstock racing. To get there, they drew inspiration from the success of the 409, an earlier Chevy performance icon. But this time, they pushed the engineering further. The 396 was equipped with a beefed-up engine block for durability, improved cooling channels to handle extreme heat, and newly designed cylinder heads with massive valves and rectangular ports that allowed better airflow at high RPMs. It was a smarter, stronger evolution of everything Chevy had learned in the performance game. One of the 396 defining features was its solid lifter camshaft. Solid lifters needed regular tweaking, but that was the price of precision. This cam was designed to scream at high RPMs, making the engine more track-ready than commuter-friendly. It demanded attention, and not just from onlookers, but from the person behind the wheel. This wasn't a plug-and-play engine for your average Sunday cruiser. The 396 was built for gearheads chasing quarter-mile glory. It craved high-octane fuel, constant tuning, and a driver who understood what it meant to live on the edge of mechanical limits. Still, the L78 earned its reputation. Thanks to glowing coverage in car magazines, the engine gained near-mythic status among enthusiasts. By 1969, 9,486 Chevelle buyers opted for the L78, a clear sign it was making waves in the performance world. The L78 often came with the RPO Z25 Supersport SS package, which transformed any Chevelle hardtop or convertible into a true street brawler. With SS badging on the grille, fenders, and tail panel, a domed hood, and power front disc brakes, the package wasn't just cosmetic, it was functional. In total, 86,307 Chevelles were sold with the SS 396 option in 1969, a testament to how desirable the combo had become. But the L78 real edge came from what lay beneath the sheet metal. It featured aluminum impact extruded domed pistons, 11.0 to 1 compression, forged steel rods, a 4-bolt main block, and a forged steel crankshaft. Its solid lifter camshaft measured 316 degrees intake and 302 degrees exhaust duration with a gnarly 0.5197-inch valve lift. Massive 2.195-inch intake and 1.845-inch exhaust valves helped move air through a Holley 4-barrel carb with large 1.686-inch primary and secondary throats, mounted to a dual-plane aluminum intake. Unfortunately, while other manufacturers were adopting slick Hurst shifters, Chevrolet stuck with Muncie linkage, which hot rod reviewers famously trashed. The Muncie linkage wouldn't go into second on 3 out of 4 tries over 15 attempts. The linkage was horrible. Still, the L78 wasn't for the casual cruiser. It was loud, raw, and full of attitude. With its dual exhaust, especially the optional dual-chambered setup that only cost $30, you got one of the best factory exhaust notes on the street. It growled, it roared, it demanded respect. Even in stock form, the 1969 L78 Chevelle was a monster. In its February 1969 issue, Hot Cars magazine clocked a bone-stock SS 396 engine running the quarter mile in 14.07 seconds at 101 miles per hour. Impressive numbers for a showroom car on street tires. But that was just the beginning. Popular Hot Rodding magazine took a 1968 SS Chevelle to the track, and with nothing more than a set of Kasler slicks, managed to dip into the high 13-second range. Add in a better shifter setup, headers, and proper tuning, and this car could easily slide into the low 13s, making it one of the most formidable machines of its time. For muscle car fans, this wasn't just speed, it was accessible, affordable. The L78 Chevelle wasn't stripped down or bare bones like some factory race cars. It came with the muscle, but still offered the styling, space, and options buyers wanted in a daily driver. It was arguably Chevrolet's fastest Chevelle available without a COPO order. The L78 became a racer's secret weapon. Dick Harrell called it the most consistent killer we ever bolted in a Chevy. Bill Grumpy Jenkins extracted 500-plus horsepower from his L78 Novas, winning the 1966 NHRA Winter Nationals C-Stock and 1967 Gator Nationals. Privateers like Dyno Don Nicholson used it to crush Ford Fairlanes. Verified wins: 1966 NHRA U.S. Nationals, 1967 AHRA Winter Nationals, Harrell, Modified Prod, 1968, 50-plus NHRA divisional events L78, Novus, and Chevelle. Street cred exploded when Car and Driver's 1968 test saw the L78 Chevelle hit 0 to 60 in 5.8 seconds, slaughtering Pontiac's GTO. The L78 had a secret weapon: consistency, tuning potential, and a lighter package that gave it the edge where it mattered. Arguably, the most lethal pairing of all was the 1968 Nova SS. Weighing in at just over 3,300 pounds and stuffed with the L78, this Nova wasn't just quick, it was frightening. In superstock trim, it could crack over 105 miles per hour at the end of the quarter mile. That kind of performance put high-dollar European exotics and even some factory drag specials on notice. Part of the L78 enduring legend was its tuning flexibility. Even mild bolt-ons, like a bigger carb, race headers, and ignition upgrades, could push the L78 well beyond 500 horsepower. It was a tuner's dream in an era where factory performance was just beginning to hit its stride. The L78 flipped that narrative. Suddenly, Chevrolet had a legitimate street king. A well-driven 1969 Camaro SS L78 could leave a GTO judge in the dust. It wasn't just fast, it was well-rounded, brutal, and precise at the same time. This performance dominance had a significant effect. Young buyers took notice. Chevy dealerships were flooded with customers chasing the L78 legend, eager to own the same muscle that was embarrassing Mustangs and Barracudas across the country. Behind the scenes at General Motors, not everyone was thrilled about the L78 street racing popularity. Far from being universally praised, the L78 became a lightning rod inside the company, sparking tensions that exposed the deep divide between Chevrolet's performance-driven engineers and GM's cautious, image-conscious leadership. At the heart of the issue was the GM's infamous 400 cubic inch engine limit for mid-size cars. On paper, this policy was about responsibility. GM wanted to avoid the intensifying horsepower war that was catching the attention of federal regulators, insurance companies, and safety advocates. It also reflected a hangover from the 1957 AMA agreement, a voluntary industry pact that called for a retreat from factory-sponsored racing and performance hype. Even though the AMA agreement was all but ignored by the mid-60s, its shadow still loomed over GM's conservative upper management who feared the reputational risks of building ever larger engines. The 396 cubic inch L78, technically under the 400 limit, was GM's version of walking right up to the line without crossing it. But the way Chevy deployed the engine was corporate chess at its finest. Engineers and marketers found clever loopholes to bring the L78 into mid-size cars like the Chevelle, Nova, and Camaro, platforms supposedly off-limits to engines of that size and power. Automotive historian Dave Newell described the era as filled with back-channel wars. Internal memos from 1964 detailed heated exchanges between Chevrolet's leadership, led by General Manager Bunky Knudsen, and GM's corporate engineering oversight group. The latter accused Chevrolet of bending the rules too far and jeopardizing the company's public reputation. Knudsen, a performance enthusiast himself, reportedly defended the engine as essential to keeping Chevrolet competitive, especially against Mopar and Ford. Bill Polkinghorne said, "We knew it was illegal for mid-size cars. So we listed it under heavy-duty truck parts. Corporate never caught on until the drag strips exploded. The proof? Bill Grumpy Jenkins. 1966 Nova L78. At Pomona, it ran 11.90 seconds at 115 miles per hour. On factory internals, Hemi teams screamed foul. Jenkins just grinned. Tell Chrysler their elephant gun just got hunted. Behind closed doors, GM's legal department sounded the alarm. In 1967, internal documents, later revealed by automotive historians, showed the company's risk management division calling for a clampdown on high-performance engines, citing unacceptable liability exposure. The L78 was singled out as a major concern. The fear wasn't just that people might crash these cars, but that GM might be held responsible. Ads for the 1968 Nova boasted 396 cubic inches of pure thunder, while brochures flaunted the engine's quarter-mile dominance. These ads were catnip for gearheads, but a PR nightmare for a company already on Washington's radar. Inside GM's 14th floor war room, Pontiac chief saw blood in the water. Pontiac boss John DeLorean saw red. His GTO was getting humiliated. A leaked 1968 memo reveals his ultimatum. Chevy has to cap the horsepower, or I take this to Roche. As the National Highway Safety Bureau, the predecessor to NHTSA, began looking into high-horsepower vehicles, GM executives like Vice President Ed Rollert urged restraint. They worried that Chevrolet's L78 image wasn't just irresponsible, it was inviting federal scrutiny, something that could trigger industry-wide regulation. Insurance companies added further pressure. By 1969, insurers had seen enough the L78-equipped vehicles like the Chevelle SS 396 were slapped with high-risk labels, especially when driven by anyone under 25. Premiums skyrocketed. For many younger buyers, the L78 core audience, insurance became more expensive than the car itself. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety began lobbying for limits on horsepower, citing statistics that showed a clear link between high-output engines and crash rates. For GM's board, still stinging from Ralph Nader's campaign and desperate to avoid another public relations disaster, the writing was on the wall. The L78 wasn't just a performance legend, it was a potential flashpoint that could threaten GM's reputation, legal standing, and even the auto industry's freedom from government control. The L78 internal struggles were compounded by broader societal shifts. Was changing. The Vietnam War had ignited widespread disillusionment, especially among the younger generation. This counterculture, fueled by anti-establishment ideals, saw Detroit's muscle cars not as symbols of freedom, but as embodiments of corporate excess and social conformity. What was once cool and rebellious began to look like wasteful, out-of-touch bravado. The L78 was particularly vulnerable. Its solid lifter, 425 horsepower big block V8, required premium leaded fuel, delivered single-digit miles per gallon, and emitted levels of pollution that were becoming unacceptable, even scandalous, to a new, eco-conscious public. As smog thickened over cities like Los Angeles, pressure mounted to rein in the worst offenders. In 1966, California implemented the first statewide exhaust emissions standards, marking the beginning of what would become a national reckoning for high-performance engines. Within GM, alarm bells rang. Engineering Chief Frank Winchell warned in a 1969 memo that the L78 and other high-compression monsters like it would not survive the coming regulatory wave unless they could be detuned. For Chevrolet's performance team, that was heresy. They had spent years perfecting the L78 aggressive power delivery. Neutering it for emissions, compliance felt like betrayal. GM's legal department tracked 37 high-profile fatalities in L78 cars between 1967 to 69. Nader's unsafe at any speed had GM terrified. An internal 1969 memo leaked to Automotive News warned L78-equipped vehicles represent unacceptable liability, attracts reckless youth. The rivals within, Pontiac DeLorean lobbied GM to restrict Chevy performance. Buick and Oldsmobile demanded L78 production caps to protect the 422 sales. GM legal Ed Rollert pushed to kill high-risk vehicles. After 1968, signs of the L78 decline were clear. That year, production of the L78 reached its peak, with estimates pointing to roughly 9,000 Chevelles, 2,000 Camaros, and 1,200 Novas rolling off the assembly line armed with Chevrolet's street-legal weapon. These figures, compiled by experts like Dave Newell and the Chevrolet Muscle Car Association, suggest a strong showing. But beneath the surface, a quiet but decisive shift in Chevrolet's priorities had begun to unfold. Chevy's glossy brochures now featured the Camaro Z28, a nimble, high-revving small-block icon with a 302 engine tailored for Trans Am competition. At the same time, gearheads were whispering about the Copo Camaros, specially ordered sleeper cars that came from the factory with the monstrous L72 427 under the hood, technically available through fleet channels, but known only to the most performance-savvy buyers. The L78, by contrast, was still available, but buried in the fine print. Its once bold presence in ads was replaced with quiet mentions on option sheets and in spec charts. It hadn't lost its punch, but it had lost its platform. And that wasn't a coincidence. Chevrolet's retreat from the L78 promotion was part of a broader corporate survival strategy. General Motors, like the rest of Detroit, was being forced to reckon with a rapidly changing regulatory and cultural climate. By 1969, the fix was in. Dealers ordered to silence L78 cars. Jim Madison, GM's own archivist, confessed, "We'd see Novus arrive with L78 badges, but under the hood, a tamed 350. Chevy printed fake trim tags to kill the legend. The Clean Air Act was the final knife. L78 11.01 compression demanded leaded fuel, now illegal. Engineers begged to develop unleaded heads. GM brass refused. Vince Piggins' performance chief was ordered, bury it or you're buried." As the Clean Air Act of 1970 loomed like a storm cloud over the muscle car industry, it promised sweeping federal emissions regulations that would render high-compression, high-octane engines like the L78 difficult, if not impossible, to produce legally. Even before the act took effect, California's 1966 exhaust standards had already forced automakers to adapt or pull back on performance options. The L78 11.0:1 compression ratio and dependency on high-octane leaded fuel made it an obvious target. It couldn't run cleanly or cheaply under the new rules. Detuning it was possible in theory, but in practice, it would rob the engine of its raw, race-bred identity. Inside Chevrolet, figures like Vince Piggins, the godfather of many of Chevy's legendary performance programs, understood the crossroads they were at. They could keep the L78 alive, but only by making it something it wasn't. And that wasn't a compromise they were willing to make. Rather than water down the L78, Chevrolet redirected enthusiasts toward more politically palatable options. The Z28 small block was still high-revving but ran cleaner and didn't draw the same scrutiny. The Copo cars, being fleet-ordered and limited in production, were easier to keep under the regulatory radar. It was a pivot born of necessity. The muscle car dream hadn't died. It was simply being reshaped by fuel grades, emissions standards, and rising insurance costs. And so, the L78, Chevy's iron block warrior, began its quiet fade into history. By 1970, it was effectively gone from Chevrolet's lineup. The engine was no longer listed as an option in order sheets for the Chevelle, Camaro, or Nova, replaced entirely by the 402 and the new 454 LS6, a 450-horsepower big block introduced in the Chevelle SS and select Copo Camaros. Today, L78 are unicorns. A 1969 Yenko Nova sold for $715,000. Why? Builder Mark Meekins says, "Nothing sounds like a solid lifter L78 at 7,000 RPM. It's raw American rebellion. The Chevy L78 is more than an engine. It's a legend. Decades after its quiet phase out, the L78 remains a holy grail for collectors, a muse for engine builders, and a symbol of an era when American automakers dared to unleash raw, untamed horsepower. Original equipped Chevelle, Camaros, and Novas command whopping prices at auctions, their rarity and performance making them crown jewels of the muscle car world. For engine builders and restorers, the L78 remains a masterpiece of 1960s engineering, revered for its robust design and tuning potential. Restorers like Mark Meekins of Muscle Car Restorations in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, described the engine as the gold standard for big block builds. The L78 solid lifters and high-compression pistons give it a sound and feel you can't fake. Rebuilding an L78 requires precision, as its components are scarce and expensive. Original cylinder heads can cost $5,000 a pair, and new old stock camshafts often exceed $1,000. Yet the effort is worth it for enthusiasts who seek the engine's distinctive lope and thunderous roar, a reminder of the muscle car era's excess. Today, surviving L78 are hunted like lost Da Vincis. But the real ghost? Project Phoenix, Piggin's secret 1970, Chevy prototype with unleaded heads and fuel injection. Was it destroyed? Former plant worker Ray Brock swore they crated 3 engines, stamped void, shipped to GM's Vault 3 in Warren. I drove the truck. Chevy's 1,004 horsepower 632 crate engine today proves the L78 spirit survived. But imagine the prototype with 500-plus horsepower as imagined by Jenkins. Would it have saved the muscle car era? Or would it have sparked a bloodbath Ford and Mopar couldn't match? The truth? Sometimes legends aren't killed. They're silenced by pen-pushing, limited thinkers behind a desk, where greed comes before the people. Without the corporate infighting and the regulatory storm, life would sure be boring. Thankfully, creative engineers use adversity and passion to find a way to evolve the engine, taming its emissions without dulling its edge. Rumors have long swirled among muscle car enthusiasts about a cache of prototype engines stashed away in a GM Secret Skunk Works Vault number 3. If you're a whistleblower, maybe you could smuggle out some footage to confirm the conspiracy theories that have been swirling around the forums for decades. Jenkins later built a 427 on steroids to humiliate GM. It ran 9s in 1971. GM lied. Racers died. And America's meanest big block was buried alive. This is Paul from Rare Car Stories reminding you to dig deeper, question everything. I'll see you down the road.